Morning, Braxton.
Hi.
Glad you found the link.
Oh yeah.
For now, it looks like it's just you and me. Oh wait, here's somebody else. Hopefully we get some more people. It's not 11 yet, and Adam hasn't showed up yet, but he should be here.
All right.
I've been sitting for a whole hour. I need to stand up. Yay, I did it. Okay. Sydney! Happy Friday. All right. Gabe is waiting in the other room. All right.
So do we just have to fill out another worksheet to get a 4? Is that
Yep.
how it is? All right, cool.
Yep, and you can do it online and then just submit it on Canvas.
Right.
Or if you wanted to print it out and handwrite it, you can do that too.
All right.
All right, let me send this link to Gabe, and hopefully our presenter will be here soon. He showed up yesterday, so he should be coming today. Yeah, that's great. We've got 60 students that are supposed to be here, and we have 2. All right, come on. Okay, oh, here he is. Morning, Adam.
Good morning, Kurt. How are you?
I'm fresh off of a 3-hour meeting.
I am not jealous of that at all. That was my yesterday, so I'm not jealous at all.
We met from 8, and I left early because I was like, I've got a meeting with students and a professional at 11.
Well, at least it provided you an out, right? If nothing else.
It was a good meeting though. It was I was meeting with my old college professor and talking about the preparation program major at BYU and what do they need to do to prepare teachers for being good teachers. So it was really cool.
That is cool.
So it looks like we have a smaller turnout today.
No worries. Totally fine. Do you think we need to give it a little bit more time to have stragglers, or do you think this might be
I hope so. We've got three classes that are supposed to be coming and doing this today. So it's kind of disappointing to me that I only have 2 students out of 3 whole classes.
Although it's not disappointing to have the 2 students here. It's not disappointing to have Braxton and Sydney here. Because I'm sure you guys are awesome.
They are. They're good. They're good students. It's great. Well, and what really threw us is on Wednesday, it was a killer snow day. And so like I had all of these kids that just didn't come at all. Like every single class, it was easier to mark who was here than who wasn't here.
Jeez.
And so that's kind of one of the reasons why I'm kind of disappointed that no one's showed up to this, because I'm like, well, you guys didn't come to school on Wednesday. You think you just get 2 days off?
I mean, yeah, right? Like that's how that works, right?
So are you at the university today, or are you working from home?
No, I'm at home. I haven't been, and aside from like the random trip onto campus, I haven't been there for almost a year, actually. It was like March 17th was or somewhere around there was the day that we came home. Which was, I may have said this last time, but it's really interesting because I only started this position at the beginning of last year when I made the move from Wildworks. And so it's very, very weird to have a job that you've been working at for, 14 months, and 12 of those months have been completely remote. And so you don't really know your colleagues all that well and things like that.
Wow.
Yeah, it's hard enough dealing with the stress of moving to a new career. Then you stack onto that the stress of a pandemic, and it's like, oh wow, this is rad, is what this is.
So while we're waiting for some students to show up, have you heard of the what is this program? It's a flyer. Okay, hold on. Success in Education.
I don't think so.
They are this esports thing. Let me pull it up. I'll show it to you. Code to Success inaugural esports. Let's open it. Let me share my screen. Because I was wondering if these guys feed into you at all.
Sure, yeah, let's take a look.
So it's this this is the high school one. So virtual tournament, sponsored by Code to Success, powered by this Generation Esports. They have this high school esports league.
Yeah, I've not seen either of those logos or heard of either of those folks before. We do have an esports director in our program, and he obviously knows way more about all this kind of stuff. What we're trying to do, because you talked about like high school esports, is we've been talking to the Utah High School, the Interscholastic, the Utah High School Activities Association, the UHSAA, because we've been talking to them about like, this is going to be something like esports at the high school level is something that's going to be happening one way or another. So do we want it to be like sanctioned by the schools, or do we want it to be kind of these outside people coming in and like running their own tournaments and everything like that? And so that's kind of the big debate right now is it something like it's football where it's, run by the schools and everything like that? Or is it something where it's more like cheer where, at any given time, there's a cheer championship going on, put on by different cheer organizations and things like that. So that's kind of the big, what's fortunate is that the UHSAA has some pretty young leadership, relatively speaking. And so they understand that esports is a thing and that it's not going anywhere. And so it would have been a much harder conversation 10 years ago when the entire like presidency and administration was made up of like 60-year-old men who never really used computers that much.
Okay. So I'm debating on whether or not I want to try to jump on this train and manage an esports team in addition to everything else that I'm doing. Because I'm pretty sure I could get students to say, yeah, I'll come play Super Smash Bros. Or I'll come do Mario Kart and whatever, and compete. But then the other issue is if I started up and then they don't have anywhere to go, like there aren't any high school programs, what's the disconnect going to be between me going and then trying to get them to you?
That is a uphill battle for sure. If you'd like, I will introduce you to our esports director. I'm gonna write this down really quickly.
I think I know him.
His name's AJ Dimmick. His name is
AJ. Yes. Yes. I've emailed him.
Oh, okay. Because if you'd like, I could re-email the two of you and tell him that you're interested, because he loves talking about this kind of stuff. He also is just a super busy dude, so things often fall by the wayside. Because, like, for example, our Overwatch team, very recently took home the national championship. And so we've been all up in Overwatch over the past little bit because that's been kind of the big thing that we've been focusing on. So, and then right now they're worrying about scholarships and all that stuff that I know about, but I'm glad that it's not my job.
So what is your job? Are you a coach? Are you
I am the industry and alumni manager. So I actually have very little to do with esports other than just I'm part of the program and there are esports in the program. My whole job at the university is to connect our program with studios that are out there, to introduce them to like, hey, because when I was in school, video game programs weren't a thing at all. Like when you were in school, right? They didn't really exist. And so my whole thing is to not only kind of evangelize our program and kind of introduce us to other studios, but then also kind of make connections with studios. Like for example, we have people who come and give talks at our school, well, virtual talks right now. Talking about anything from, hey, here's this cool tool that we invented, or hey, if you want to know how we handle the writing process at our studio, we're going to have a panel of writers here, or whatever the case may be. So kind of giving that real world industry experience to the students. That's kind of all my job. And then connecting the alumni together, and in an ideal world, hosting like alumni events and things like that. Not happening much right now, but one day it will.
Now this is alumni
of our program, of the EAE program. So we have a graduate degree and an undergraduate degree, and so every year we have a couple hundred people who are going out and working in the game industry, and Utah has a game development industry, but not a very big one. And so a lot of our alumni will end up in places like Los Angeles or Seattle, or kind of other places where we have big pockets of alumni. We also have a really, really big international group of students every year. And so it's kind of interesting because some of them, they come here with the express purpose of like, I'm going to get a degree and then I'm going to get a job in America, and that's going to be my career. But every year there are a handful of students who very specifically have the idea of, I'm going to come to America, get a degree, and then I'm actually going to go back to China and start my own game studio in China, or I'm going to become a leader at a game studio in China. So that's kind of cool for us because we're able to our influence is kind of spread wherever we go, to the point where like it's actually hard for me to meet somebody who hasn't, at least like in the industry, it's hard for me to meet somebody who hasn't at least heard of our program, if not worked with one of our alumni before.
Interesting. Well, it looks like we got our third student. So,
hi, Conrad.
Thanks so much for coming, guys, this morning. So Adam is here to meet with us. So we were just talking a little bit about kind of what he does and the program that he helps run. And I'll allow him to talk about experiences that he's had working on developing video games. And if you're wondering, you're thinking about getting into that industry, he has plenty of good notes for you to keep in mind, and suggestions on things that you could be doing. And I'll let him talk for most of the time. If you have questions, you can chime in, and we've got a nice small group, so it's not like you're going to be talking over anyone else.
Yeah, how much, what time are we looking at, Kurt, as far as when we're ending?
I think we definitely hard stop by noon at the latest. But probably like 11:40, 11:45 would probably be better, especially because we have a smaller group and might not get as many questions as we did last time.
Yes, but I can talk forever. So
yeah, that
welcome
is true.
to my life. Okay, well, Braxton, Sydney, and Conrad, thank you for coming today to hear me talk. If you do have any questions, or if you want me to clarify something, you just unmute your mic and talk. Feel free to interrupt if you have any questions or anything. As Kurt said, my name is Adam, and I Right now, you guys probably heard me talking to Kurt just a second ago. Right now, I work at the University of Utah. And at the University of Utah, they have a video game program. And what that means is students can go there and they can learn how to make video games, um, which is something that's really, really cool because it's something that didn't exist a long time. It didn't even exist 10 minutes or 10 minutes, excuse me. It didn't even exist 10 years ago. But because there are so many things that go into making video games and so many people who have to make them, schools started to realize, hey, we should start teaching students so they don't have to teach themselves. But before I moved to the University of Utah, I actually worked for different game studios for about 12 years. So I probably worked in the game industry for as long as you guys have been alive, more or less. And so one of the main games that I worked on was a game called Animal Jam, which maybe some of you have heard of. It's an online game where kids get to become different kind of animals and everything. And my job mostly was I was a designer for a little bit, and then I was a writer. So a video game writer, some people say, well, what does a video game writer do? A video game writer can, depending on how many writers there are on the team, you might be in charge of everything. And what I mean by that is anything that's related to writing or story. So, in my job, I would help create characters. I would work with the design team and make stories, like what's going to actually happen in the game. I would write the app store descriptions, like when you're downloading something on your phone and you're reading about the game. I would write those. Um, and for a long time, I was actually the only writer on my team. And then there got to be so much work that we had to bring on, and so then there was an entire writing team. And so once there was a lot of us working together, we were able to divide it up. And for example, one of our writers was named Julie, and Julie was really, really good at writing dialogue. Do you guys know what dialogue is? Yeah, dialogue is what people say back and forth. So she was really good at writing dialogue. So I let her do most of the dialogue, whereas I was better at kind of taking a step back and making like the whole story. Like this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And so the whole team kind of took their different specialties. And so so I and I worked on a number of other games as well, a bunch of games that none of you would have ever played. Unfortunately, I didn't get to work on anything super, super famous like Minecraft or anything like that, sadly. But I so one thing that a lot of people, they always ask me is, they say, well, how are video games made? Like what actually happens to go in to make a video game? And so to do that, I have a question for all of you. How many of you like to do group projects in school? Like how many of you like to have a group of you get together and everybody does like a little bit to make one big project? Does anybody like doing that? It's okay if you don't like it, but does anybody like doing that? If you like doing that, then video games is something that could be a good career for you. I will talk to people and they'll say, I don't like group projects at all. At which point I will say, video games are not for you, because video games is one really, really, really big group project. You will work at a game studio where there can be hundreds or even thousands of people working, and everybody is only working on one game, right? Or maybe two games or whatever the case may be. But so everyone is doing their own little part to make something really, really big and awesome. So let me ask you really quick. I'll call on you. Braxton, what's one of your favorite video games?
Do you count like chess as a video game or something? Like maybe.
I mean, there is a video game version of chess. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Sydney, what about you?
I don't usually play video games too often, but sometimes I play more.
Oh, did you just freeze or did I just freeze?
I think she just cut out or something.
Okay, we'll wait if she comes back for just a sec. In the meantime, Conrad, what's one of your favorites?
I don't know. I actually have played Animal Jam a couple times. It's fun. I liked it. Here's a question for you. What is the biggest thing you worked on in that game?
So I was the only writer in Animal Jam for 7 years. So for the first 7 years of Animal Jam, every character, every bit of dialogue, every Jama Journal, which was the newspaper that came out every couple of years or every couple of weeks, every storyline, every quest, anything that involved writing and story for the first 7 years of that game was all me. So the biggest thing that I probably worked on is that for those of you who know Animal Jam, or for those of you who don't, we would update the game every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, there would be new stuff that would happen in the game. And so I designed a storyline that would take 18 months, which is a year and a half. So it basically started in summer and then went until the next winter. And every 2 weeks, we had something happen in that big storyline to continue the story. So, it all started with, there was something that if you guys remember, this would have been a few years ago, but there was that big solar eclipse that happened. Well, we made it so that there was a solar eclipse in Animal Jam as well. And then once that solar eclipse happened, it opened up this underground archive where there was all these books and all of these scrolls that people hadn't seen for thousands of years. And then as they were studying, they learned about these cities that existed a long time ago, and all these things. And so that storyline continued for a full 18 months. And it involved every aspect of the game. We would have toys that were tied to it. There was, quests that were tied to it, things like that. So that's probably the biggest thing that I worked on, was that big year and a half long storyline. But Sydney, I see you're back. You froze right at the end of what you were saying. You said you didn't play video games much, but you did play, and then it kind of froze right as you said that.
Yeah, it kind of froze for me too, which is kind of weird. But sometimes I play Mario Kart with my siblings and stuff, and we try and compete.
Okay, perfect.
They win.
Awesome. Elise, what about you? Do you have any favorite video games?
I really like to play Minecraft, I guess.
Very cool. And then Francis, what about you? Do you have any favorite games?
Kind
What's one of your favorites?
of.
Oh, I think we have people freezing a lot. Are you there, Francis? Okay, we'll see if Francis comes back, and then we'll re-ask that question. The reason I ask everybody's favorite video game is because let's take Mario Kart, for example, because I really, really like Mario Kart. Mario Kart, it takes a lot of people to make Mario Kart. And what I mean by that is you're going to have one person working at Nintendo whose whole job, that there's actually probably going to be an entire team who their whole job is just going to be designing the levels themselves. Right? They're going to have a pad of paper, and they're going to say, okay, let's see, let's make a level that takes place in a volcano. Okay, so we'll have, here will be the starting point, and then maybe this is the volcano, and so maybe the course goes around and then up the volcano like that, and then once you get to the top of the volcano erupts and it shoots you back to the starting line, and maybe that's the loop. And then as they are designing it, they're like, oh, well, right here, we should have some falling rocks. And right here, maybe we'll have a jump over a chasm. So it's like a really cool thing. So you'll have an entire team who's just doing this part. You'll have another team or another person who is just thinking about the different, for those of you who have played Mario Kart, the different characters have different stats. And what I mean by that is some of them accelerate fast, but don't have a very high top speed. Some of them have a really high top speed, but don't accelerate very fast. And so you're going to have an entire other group of people who are going to be saying, okay, who can, how fast can Mario go compared to how fast can Luigi go? You are then going to have an entire team of artists who are making all of the art that goes into the game, right? So you're going to have one person who's in charge of making when the volcano erupts and all of that lava is coming out and everything, that's going to be one person's whole job, is just making sure that that lava looks really cool. You're going to have another person whose job is to design. There's going to be plants all along the side of the road here. Their whole job is going to be coloring and modeling the plants. Anything from, if birds are flying by in the sky to the road itself that has like the dirt on it, all of those are handled by artists. And then you're going to have a whole other team of programmers who are going to be the people actually doing the coding, who are going to make it work, right? So you'll have one coder who's just in charge of collision. And collision means in a video game, when you bump up against something, it means your character doesn't go through the something. So, right. So there will be a wall and someone will be just in charge of collision, where it's like, okay, if they hit the wall, we need to make sure they actually hit the wall and they don't fall through it. Somebody else will be in charge of the AI, the artificial intelligence, where it says, okay, if it's someone who is a single player racing around, how are the other computers going to act? Are they going to be super, super aggressive and shoot red turtle shells and blue turtle shells all the time? Or are they going to be a little bit silly and they're going to make dumb mistakes? And if there's a choice between two paths, which path are they going to take? And so a game like Mario Kart can have literally 200 or 300 people working on it. And each one of those people is going to have a very specific thing that they do. So let's just pretend, I don't know what all of your specialties are, but let's just pretend all of us are making a game. Okay. Well, we talked about how I have an experience writing. So I would write the story for the game, but then let's say that Braxton was in charge of doing the art for all of the characters. Let's say we made a game that took place with like knights and wizards and orcs and stuff like that, like Lord of the Rings stuff. So Braxton would be in charge of drawing all of those characters. And then Sydney would be in charge of she would design all of the spells and all of the weapons and everything like that. When these guys are fighting, Sydney's in charge with making sure that like none of them are too powerful or none of them, are too hard to earn. Conrad, he would be in charge of the AI. So he would be coding there and he would be saying, okay, if you're fighting a bad orc, this is how the orc is going to react. If you dodge to the right, is the guy going to follow you or is he going to try and swing where you were? Elise, your job is actually going to be a job that I haven't even talked about yet. Your job is going to be what we call a producer, which is your job as a producer is you're going to make sure everybody else can do their jobs. So if Sydney is waiting on artwork from Braxton, you have to be the one to go up and say, Sydney, you missed your milestone. And then Sydney says, oh, I'm still waiting for that art on Braxton. So then you go up to Braxton, you say, Braxton, what's the deal? How come you didn't deliver your art on time? And then Braxton says, oh, because the software that we used had an update and it broke all of my art. So now we have to learn how to fix that. And so then Elise, you'd be running around and you'd be trying to fix everybody. And then Francis, your job might be as any number of other things that we haven't talked about. Your job might be the audio person who's making all of the sound effects. So when every time an orc swings a sword, it goes, ugh, or ah, or anything like that. Something like that might happen. And all of us working together, we would each do our own little part, and then together we would make a game. I like to think of it as, are any of you super strong? Like, do you have like big muscles? Because I'm not very strong at all. But if you think about it, if all of us were standing in a group, if there was something really, really heavy and any one of us tried to lift it, we might not be able to lift it on our own. But if all of us got together and started lifting it up, then with each one of us lifting just a little bit, we might be able to lift the entire thing. I guarantee you that your whole class, if you guys, if any one of you tried to lift Kurt or Mr. Twining, if any of you tried to lift him on yourself, you couldn't do it. But I bet if your whole class got together and everybody tried to lift him at once, you could lift him. You could throw him up to the ceiling probably. And that's because each one of you is doing just a teeny little bit. And so that's exactly how video games go, is that everybody just does their own little part, and all of those little parts build up to make a video game. So that's kind of how video games are made is you have a group of people working together. Sometimes they're working together in the same studio. Sometimes they're working together over Zoom like this. Um, and you're going to have a bunch of people working together, and then they'll be making a game, and then, you know, they'll release the game, and then they'll pay attention to how the audience likes it. And they'll say, oh, okay, people really didn't like it when we did such and such, so we won't do that again. But people really loved it when we did this and this and this. In Mario Kart, people really loved the levels where we had the hang gliders that, you know, you could fly down. So let's add more of those in the next Mario Kart. That's something you guys have probably talked about this word, but have you guys talked about the word iterate or iteration? Have you talked about that in class? So to iterate, it means to take something and then to do it again, taking into the account the stuff that you learned last time. And then, so like, for example, if you tried to bake a cake and the first time you were like, oh, that tasted gross, maybe I need more flour. So then the next time you try and bake that cake again, and then you add more flour. And then you go, oh, you know what? We forgot the chocolate. So then the next time you make sure to add the flour and the chocolate. But then, oh, wait, we added too much chocolate and now the cake doesn't taste good. Okay, so now the next time we'll put the flour and the chocolate in, but not too much chocolate. That is iteration. It means you do something and you do it again and you do it again and you do it again. And every time you learn from what you've done before. And all of software development, whether or not it's video games or people making, you know, Zoom or people making spreadsheets or anything like that, all of software development is based off of iteration. And it means that you make something and then you try and make it better, and then you try and make it better, and then you try and make it better. And so that's kind of the cool thing about video games is depending on the video games that you work on, if it's a game like Animal Jam, you get to iterate on it every 2 weeks, because every 2 weeks you're kind of making a new video game. But if it's a game like Mario Kart, maybe you make your game and then you iterate upon it for the next Mario Kart that's going to come out in a couple of years. So anyway, so that's kind of what I did for a really, really long period of my life. And now, like we talked about at the beginning, now I work for the University of Utah, and we teach students how to do everything that I've talked about. So that's kind of cool. So if any of you want to, you know, when you are getting a little bit older, when you are looking at what you want to do for your life, if you want to make video games, you could come to the University of Utah and you could learn how to make them, whether you want to be an artist or a programmer or a designer or a writer or a producer. You can come to a school like the University of Utah and they can teach you how to do it, which is something that's really, really cool. And yes, I think that they should carry you around on a chair as well. I think that would be amazing to see. So, okay, I'm going to stop talking for a second because I have a tendency to talk a lot. What questions do you guys have? It can be questions about anything about... Yeah, Conrad, go for it.
So might sound like a weird question, but
no, go for it.
How did you come up with the storylines for the games?
That's a really, really good question. And something that I've learned in life is there's no such thing as weird questions or silly questions or dumb questions. It's always good to ask questions. And sometimes it may be a question that someone's never heard before or never thought of before, but that doesn't make it a weird question. So in answer to your question, Conrad, of how did I come up with the storylines of Animal Jam? Well, it took kind of a long time to come up with different aspects. Like we knew we wanted to have, for example, we had these things called adventures in the games, which were kind of these quests. And in one of the quests, we knew we wanted the Phantoms, who were the bad guys, to invade Jamaa. And so I kind of worked with the design team and we were like, okay, what would a Phantom invasion look like? Would it be something that they would send in a whole army? Or would at first, maybe would they try and send in like 1 or 2 spies to try and learn information and try and sabotage some stuff? And so we started talking about the different story possibilities of things like that. And then something that I love doing as a writer, because that's what I studied in school. I studied English and creative writing. I love writing. I love telling stories. So one of my favorite things to do is I will always, like every time in my mind, I'll be thinking, every day in my mind, I'll be thinking like, what kind of stories could happen with this group of people or with this person or with this circumstance? You know, like right now, as we were talking, I started thinking of this story of like, how funny would it be if there was a story about a group of kids who started carrying their teacher around, and then all the other teachers wanted it to as well. So there was even more students. And then eventually the students were lifting the entire school and walking around with the entire school. That's how my mind works. I think about stories all the time. And so one thing that if any of you want to be writers or storytellers, even if it's not in video games, the one thing that I could recommend, there's two things that I would recommend more than anything else. The first thing I would recommend is to tell your own stories, to write. Like if you want to tell stories for a job or for what you do when you're older, do it now. Not everything you write will be great. A lot of the stuff you write won't be very good, and that's totally fine. The important thing is you tell those stories, right? Because then you can iterate upon them. For example, one of my favorite movies and one of my favorite books is called Lord of the Rings. And maybe some of you have seen or read Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is a very, very long book. It's a very, very thick book. And the man who wrote it, his name was J.R.R. Tolkien. He did not write it in one day. He didn't just sit down and be like, da 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 da. Okay, cool. Next. He would write a passage and then he would think about that passage and he would be like, is this describing stuff the way that I want to? If I'm having the characters go in this specific place, well, what does that mean? If they're over here, that means that they can't do anything if something's happening over here. And so he would write and then he would iterate upon his writing. So that's one thing I would recommend is if any of you want to be storytellers or writers, write your own stuff, even if it's not good, because if it's not good, you're practicing and you're going to get better at it. And then the other thing that I would recommend is that if you want to be a storyteller, surround yourself with stories. And what I mean by that is watch movies, read books, play video games, any kind of listen to audiobooks, anything that you can do to surround yourself with other people's stories. That will help you become a better storyteller, because not only will you learn how to tell your own stories really well, but you'll also get ideas for other people's stories. Like you might watch Star Wars and think, oh, cool, there's this one character in this one scene. Like, have any of you guys seen The Mandalorian? I've seen it. So it's a really cool show. I really, really like it. There's one scene in the new season where he's coming into a fishing town and there's this guy who's working on the docks who his ship kind of crashes. And the guy who's working on the docks just kind of like puts his hands on his hips and like shakes his head because he crashed his ship and everything. Well, now all of a sudden my mind is thinking about like, well, what's that guy's story? Like when he goes home from working on the docks, what does he do? Does he have a family? Is he the youngest kid of a whole bunch of kids and all of his brothers and sisters are doing other jobs and he's the only one who works on the docks? What is he? Does he like fishing? Maybe he's going to go out fishing one day and he's going to, instead of catching a fish, he's going to catch treasure. He's going to find a sunken treasure ship or a sunken treasure chest. And so I would have never been able to think about that kind of stuff if I hadn't have watched that episode of Mandalorian. So that's the other advice I can give to all of you is if you want to write or be storytellers, surround yourself with as much stories as you can, because it will make you a better storyteller. And that actually, that advice applies to any job that you want to go for. If you want to be an athlete, not only do you want to play as many sports as you can, but you should be watching other people play sports. If you want to be an engineer, if you want to be a coder, not only should you be practicing your own programming, but you should be watching other people's talks on programming, and you should be playing other people's games to see how they program something. That's something that's really kind of cool about this world, is that there are a lot of people who live here and a lot of people do stuff. And whatever you want to do, whatever it is, odds are that there's other people who are doing that same thing, and you can go and you can learn from them and take the skills that they've learned, take them into your own life, and then you can go do your own thing. Sorry, that was my really long answer to your question, Conrad. Who else has a question for me?
This isn't really a question, but it's kind of like something that's kind of like backing up like what could have happened like with that guy that's on like the dock. So I've like one of my favorite books, The Outsiders, like the Socias, and don't really have like, they don't really talk about them too much, you know, but like the Greasers, you know, they just like explain a lot about them. So what I think is really cool is that they could maybe like make another book about like the Sosha's life, and like maybe like there's something hidden behind their story or something, you know.
Yeah, you could write that story, right? You could explore. You could say, hey, what happened to these characters? And the cool thing about stories is you don't even have to have them be. It doesn't even have to be the Soshas in The Outsiders. Maybe you take the ideas that are in your head and you put them, instead of the Soshas in on Earth, maybe they're all in space and there's something cool that's happening in space. Or maybe it's that same group that happened, but they're all knights in shining armor who lived a long time ago. One thing, you guys have probably heard of Romeo and Juliet, right? The Shakespeare play. Have any of you ever heard of a play called West Side Story? So West Side Story is a play that takes place in New York in like the 60s, the 1960s. And but it is the story of Romeo and Juliet. But Romeo and Juliet was written in like 1600. It was written 400, 500 years ago. And so someone took that idea and they said, hey, what would Romeo and Juliet be like now, or at least in the 60s? Like, what would it be like if it was still two families who didn't like each other, but instead of living in castles, they lived in like apartments in New York? What would that story look like? And so someone made West Side Story, taking that idea. So Braxton, you could do that. You could take parts of The Outsiders that you like, and you could be like, I wonder what would happen if this happened. And it doesn't even have to be set in the same place that The Outsiders is set. Maybe it's set somewhere else, or maybe the characters are actually different characters and you're just taking ideas from those characters. I don't know. Have any of you ever heard of a book series? It's called Aragon. It's like a dragon book series. It was written by someone who was, the very first book, he wrote it when he was 13. And it's a book all about dragons and knights and swords and wizards and everything like that. But he took a lot of inspiration from Star Wars. He was like, hey, I like a lot of cool things about Star Wars, but what if Star Wars wasn't in space? What if it was with dragons? And so that's something that he did. And so that's something, and yeah, The Lion King is, like Mr. Twining says, The Lion King is Hamlet. And so you can take inspiration from stories, from other people's stories. Some of the best stories in the world are stories that started with inspiration from something else, and then they added stuff to it. Sorry, I really like storytelling and I really like that kind of stuff. But who else has a question? It can be about stories, it can be about video games, it can be about working as a big team. What other questions do we have?
I have a question, but if anyone else has a question, they can ask. So does anyone else have a question?
That's kind of you to be thinking about others like that, Braxton.
All right. So I'm just asking, like, what usually happens like every single day, like for your job? Like, do you ever have to like travel anywhere, or like, are you always like working on like just this one game for a long time or something?
So when I was working in the game industry, that's a really, really good question. I wouldn't do much traveling, but there were people in the studio who would. But my main job, this is kind of a breakdown of what my job was. I would come to work every day, and the very first thing we would have is called a stand-up meeting. And that's where the whole team gets together. So programmers, artists, designers, writers, we'd all get together and we'd all talk about what we plan to do that day. We would also talk about like long-term stuff. Like, remember, our Christmas event is coming up in 2 months, so we have to work on that. But we would also talk about what are we planning on doing that day? Like, hey, today I hope to be able to get the rest of the dialogue written for that quest. And then we would also, in this stand-up, we would talk about anything that is, they sometimes call them roadblocks. Anything that is not roadblocks. It would be anything that is preventing you. Like, hey, I can't write my dialogue because I don't know what the characters are going to be talking about a puzzle, but the designers haven't designed the puzzle yet. So I can't have the characters talk about it until the designers finish what they're doing. So we would talk about roadblocks and things like that. And then everyone would go to their desks and work on whatever it is that they're working on. I was a more senior person. So I spent, like Mr. Twining, I spent a lot of time in meetings. And so those meetings would be, we would have a meeting where one meeting we would have would be, okay, we're designing some new characters. So it was the designers and the writers and the artists all sitting together, and they'd have, a big TV with stuff on it. And we'd be like, okay, we want a character who is a construction foreman, right? So he's the guy, he kind of talks like this, and he always is about, hey, we got to go build that thing over there. So what would a guy like that look like? Well, maybe he'd have a hard hat on. Maybe he'd have kind of a big tummy. Maybe it wouldn't be a guy. Maybe it would be a girl who does that. And if it was, she'd probably have her hair pulled back tight in a ponytail, because you wouldn't want loose hair on a construction site. So anyway, the whole purpose of a meeting, in the best case, especially in a creative industry like games, the whole purpose of a meeting is to get everybody's input, again, to make something that's better than any one person could do. Maybe I have a really cool idea about, hey, I think the character should do this. But then one of the artists comes in and says, well, but what about if they did this? And that could be a better idea than my idea. And so I would spend some time in meetings. And then I'd go back to my desk and work for a little bit. And then depending on other stuff, there might be other things that I was doing. Like, for example, sometimes we would have tours come through the studio where it would be kids just like you who'd want to come and see how video games are made. So sometimes I would lead a tour. Or sometimes one thing that's really cool, as you guys, if any of you go to work in a video game studios are really cool, fun places to work. And they'll usually have things like ping pong tables or video game arcades, because they want people to be able to take like little breaks throughout the day. So every now and then I would do that, as well as I would go play games with my friends. Or one thing I would recommend to all of you, and this won't affect you so much now because you're so much younger, but as you get older, your body's not going to be as cool as it is now. And so if you're going to be doing a job where you're sitting in front of a computer all day, I would recommend going for a walk every day. And so I had a friend that I worked with where every day at about lunchtime, we would just go for a mile-long walk. We just go down the street and back, and we'd talk and we'd have fun, and it would get our blood flowing and getting, it would have us exercise and things like that. And then every day we do the same. The next day we do the same thing. We talk about at that stand up, we'd say, hey, was everybody able to do what they wanted to yesterday? Is there anything that they're planning on doing today? And then we just do that every single day. Does that answer your question, Braxton?
Yeah, that's really cool that you guys like go like have like a meeting and see what you're gonna do that day, because isn't it like the producer or something, like who's supposed to be like in charge of like make sure everyone's doing their job right?
Very
that
good.
Could probably really help with the producer.
Yeah, the producer is the one who's leading those meetings every time. And the producer's saying like, okay, Braxton, what do you got for us today? Or, sometimes it's bad news. Sometimes it's, oh, hey, we released an update last night and it broke, and now no one can play the game. And so now every single person in the studio put down what you were working on. We have to fix this problem. So the engineers or whoever is going to fix what broke, and then everybody else is going to test it really quickly to make sure we can get that update going as quickly as possible so that people can continue to play the game. Any other questions? Anybody?
I have two. So my first question is, have you ever been like working on a storyline and it just like you almost get inspired to do something else partway through the storyline, take it in a completely different direction?
Yeah.
And then my second one is, did you know that you wanted to be a coder, or how did you get into coding?
Those are both really, really good questions. I will often start a story thinking that I'm going to go in one direction, and then something will happen that makes me change directions. Usually it's changing directions for the better. It's usually like, hey, I got an idea from one of my teammates, or hey, we decided to do this. So that happens all the time. I would actually recommend, if any of you are going to go to any sort of creative industry, whether it's art or writing or video games, anytime where you're creating something, don't just stick with your plan. If something comes along that makes that plan better, don't be afraid to go in a new direction. It can be tough because sometimes you've already done stuff and it's like, oh no, if we change directions, then we have to figure out how we're going to do it. But if it's a good idea, excuse me, if it's a good idea, it's going to make a much better game or product overall. As for coding, I actually did very, very little coding in my job. I would do what is called scripting, which is kind of like coding, but even then I would only do a very, very little bit. And I actually took a coding class when I was about your age. I took an after school coding class. And this is before, I mean, this was so long ago that computers didn't even really have computer mice at that point. Like it was all just keyboards at that point. So that's how long ago that was. If I said the phrase 386, Mr. Twining would know what I was talking about, but none of you would know what I was talking about. And I actually took a coding class, and for whatever reason, coding does not really make sense in my head. I understand the logic of it and I get how coding works, but I could sit down and it would take me an hour to code something that it would take somebody else 5 minutes to code. And so I was fortunate enough that I knew that early on. And the reason I say I was fortunate enough is because I realized, you know what, maybe coding isn't for me, but maybe I can work with coders in a job and then I can do other stuff to help them out. So I actually knew from a pretty early age that I wanted to like make video games or be in a creative industry like this. But I also knew from a pretty early age that coding, it was very, very difficult for me. And so instead of trying to, and of course, just because something doesn't make sense to you at first doesn't mean it won't make sense to you forever, right? Some of the best coders I know are people who they didn't even take their first coding class until high school. They had never even touched code until high school. So just because something doesn't make sense a little bit doesn't mean you can't pursue it. Like writing didn't make very much sense to me when I very first started. But I stuck with it and then I became, I think, a pretty good writer. But yeah, so that was something that I was kind of fortunate enough to do. And you guys, I'm actually really, really jealous of you guys because, like I said, the class that I took, it was a coding class after school. There was 3 people in the class. The teacher was a very, very grumpy old teacher who only knew BASIC, which was a coding language at the time. And he didn't really want to teach anybody. And so learning was very, very difficult. And then I didn't have a computer at home that could do like the homework. And so I'm really, really jealous of you guys because you guys get to take coding classes in school, which means that in one semester or trimester or year, you guys will learn more about coding in that little amount of time than people my age would have maybe learned even in a longer period of time. Because a lot of the times when people wanted to code when they were my age, they kind of had to learn themselves. And this is something, it may blow your minds a little bit, but the internet didn't exist at that time. So you couldn't just look up online, how should I code? Like YouTube wasn't a thing. The internet wasn't a thing. If you wanted to learn how to code, you had to go to the library and hopefully find a book that somebody had written on coding. And then you had to have hopefully a computer that could do the programming, that could process it for you. So you guys are in a really, really cool position that you have all these resources to help you learn. And I will say this, if any of you do want to go into video games, even if you don't want to be a programmer, even if you want to be an artist or a producer, no matter what you want to do in video games, knowing how to code, at least like they call it rudimentary, like even just like basic coding stuff, that's going to make your life way, way easier. Everybody I've ever worked with in a video game company who doesn't know how to code always wishes they knew how to, because it's so much easier. Even if you're a writer and you're like, hey, I just made this dialogue stuff. Well, maybe you want to test it out. And so you want to put it in the game yourself, but you can't put it in the game because you don't know how to code. So you have to give it to an engineer and then you have to wait for them to put it in. So I will recommend that if you want to be in video games, no matter what your discipline is, knowing those basics about coding is going to be really, really beneficial for you. Does that answer your question, Conrad?
Yeah, it does.
Cool. I know we're about out
Yeah.
of time.
We're about out of time. The one thing, I guess, last question. I know they have to fill this out on their worksheet. Adam, could you talk about what are some of the things about your job that maybe aren't so desirable? So what's the least favorite part of
least favorite parts
what
of the
you
job?
did?
That's a really good question. I'll be quick about it. For some people, working on a team is very, very hard because some people don't like receiving feedback. They think that whatever they have made is the most beautiful, perfect thing on earth, and they don't want somebody to come up and say, "Hey, have you ever thought about doing this?" It can also be hard working under deadlines because video games are often announced way before they come out. And they'll say, hey, this new game is coming out on June 1st. Well, today's February 29th, and we've now announced to the world that on June 1st, our video game is coming out. So if our game's not ready by June 1st, then we're going to be working a lot in between now and June 1st to get it out. So that's a not fun part of the job is deadlines, because it's so easy with video games to want to make the coolest, best, most awesome video game ever. And then you realize, oh, wait, we only have like a month to do that. Well, all right, everybody, we're working for 18 hours today. So we're going to order pizza to the office and bring a sleeping bag because that's what we're going to be doing. So that's probably the least fun part for me was deadlines. And I know from other people that I've spoke with, sometimes they don't like receiving feedback on the work that they've done. Where did you go to learn the skills that you have today? Very, very good question, Sydney. So the skills that I have are all writing-based skills, and I went to college for that. I went to high school and in college, I took writing classes, English classes, creative writing classes. Again, when I was kind of learning this stuff, when I was older, the internet existed, but it didn't exist in the form that it does today. What's cool is that if any of you have skills you want to learn, whatever that skill is, whether you want to be an auto mechanic or a football player, you can go to YouTube and there will be 1,000 videos on how to do that exact same thing. Elise, I went to BYU and I got a creative writing degree, an English degree. I do know a bunch of people that I've worked with will usually go to college. The artists will usually get some sort of art degree. The engineers will get a CS degree, a computer science degree. I would definitely recommend, like, it is possible to teach yourself those skills on your own and through YouTube and things like that. But I would definitely recommend, like, the stuff that you learn, especially in high school and college, that stuff's going to be really, really important for whatever job you want to do. Even if it's, again, even if it doesn't have anything to do with coding or video games, those skills that you learn in high school and college will be really, really valuable for you. Is there anything else? I know you guys have a worksheet. Is there anything else really quickly that's on the worksheet? How long did I go to college? I went to college for 4 years. I got what's called a bachelor's degree or an undergraduate degree. So I went there for 4 years. I think 3.5 because I think I did a lot of classes. No, it was 4. It was 4 full years. Is there anything else? Okay, cool. Sorry I took so much time talking about stuff.
Hey,
I really like talking to people. So
I actually have one question.
Okay.
What would you suggest for people who are trying to go into a similar field of the game making process?
I would suggest that they learn as much as they can about how making video games works, because I think a lot of people think that, like, they have a misconception. They don't really know how video games are made. So I would suggest not only learning about it through books and videos and everything like that, but if you really want to go to make video games, look up schools like the University of Utah or USC or DigiPen or anything like that. There are a bunch of schools now that have programs dedicated to making video games. And if you want to learn those skills, that's actually probably one of the best ways that you could do it, is to go to a program that specifically teaches not just, hey, we're going to teach you how to code or we're going to teach you art, but we're going to teach you how to do that for video games specifically. That would probably be one of my biggest recommendations. I actually hope that I see, you know, in 6 or however many years, I hope to be able to see at least some of you at the University of Utah. And I want you to come up to me and be like, Adam, I was in Mr. Twining's class and you talked to my class and now I'm here to learn how to make video games. That would be super awesome for me.
Well, thanks so much, Adam. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day on Friday. I'm hoping I'm going to post this on YouTube for the students who actually didn't make it today, so that they'll be able to view this and still get the experience, even though they weren't able to ask their own questions. And thanks so much for you four who came, and Frances as well, but she headed out. I don't know if her connection died or what happened. So.
And then also, if any of you ever want to, if you have, you know, if you're really serious about making video games and everything, Mr. Twining has a way to get in contact with me. I would be happy to answer any additional questions or anything like that. Because as you can tell, I like talking about this stuff. So I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can.
Okay. You guys all have a wonderful Friday.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Adios.